Hey, it's Manny Navarro, Miami Hurricanes beat writer for The Athletic with Ira Schofel from Warchant.com, managing editor. Big week for us, Ira. Miami and Florida State getting back together in Tallahassee. I like the fact that the records for both teams are improved, considering what we've kind of gone through the last few years, buddy. The Seminoles are playing great. Number 4 in the country, on their way to potentially a college football playoff. Miami is 6-3, coming off a bad loss. They got all kinds of issues, but hey, we're in a much better spot in this rivalry than we have been, right?
Yeah, man. The last few years, it was bringing me back to those years where they got to play on Labor Day and nobody knew they weren't good.
Right.
And you could kind of fake it till people found out later. Oh, those teams actually were that 10-7 game really was two pretty bad football teams.
You and I have watched a lot of these games over the years, and we've seen these programs go through head coaches. Me especially at Miami, it feels like it's been a never-ending revolving door. But the feeling was that Mario Cristobal was going to come in and fix things. And going into this game, he's 11-10 overall. Seminoles are heavily favored to win this game. Meanwhile, on the other sideline, I go back and I look at Mike Norvell and I think, man, when this rivalry started, things were not going well for him. They were 3-6, then 5-7. But it felt like the turning point for him really was that win against Miami in Tallahassee a couple years ago. Do you agree or disagree?
It was a big one without question. I mean, again, you think back to that 2020 game down there. Oh my gosh! I mean, you
Yes.
you couldn't have. It felt like they were, completely different hemispheres. Miami felt like, okay, they are on their way now. De'Ara King's killing it at quarterback, and Manny's got it going on. And it felt like, okay, I don't know. That's the way it felt from the outside. I don't know if you
Yeah.
thought that they were, but man, that was like it could not have been less evenly matched teams. And then, like you said, Florida State wins the game the next year, kind of in a miracle fashion to some degree,
Yep.
to get the 4th and 14. And then they first they had a wheel route down the sideline to get in scoring position, then hit the 4th and 14 and win the game in a game that they probably didn't have any business winning. And then last year was completely the opposite, where
Yep.
Miami's quarterback gets hurt, he's not really available, and it's not even competitive. So it's just been a crazy last few years. This is probably, I mean, I know the point spread's like, you said 15 points, but it's probably the best footing, back to your original point, the best footing that the two teams have been on in a while.
Yeah. And really it feels like for Miami, I think everybody's sort of looking at this like, okay, they got no chance into this going into this game the way Tyler Van Dyke's been playing, 5 touchdowns, 10 interceptions in his last 4 starts, no touchdowns, 5 picks ever since he basically took that huge blow at North Carolina when he threw the touchdown pass. He just doesn't look like the same dude. And so, everybody's wondering, is Tyler Van Dyke going to start? Are they going to go with the freshman Emory Williams? I spoke to someone earlier today. I think the feeling is Tyler Van Dyke. I think I saw Mike Norvell's interview. They're sort of preparing for Tyler Van Dyke as well. It only makes sense. You don't throw a true freshman on the road against the number 4 team in the country.
Yeah, Corey, who I work with, we were sitting in Florida State's press conference on Monday, and he started to say, "There's no way you could play," and he was going to say the freshman, and I finished it for him, and I was like, Tyler Van Dyke. I was like, there's no way you could put him back out there again after this past Saturday. But his point was the exact opposite. Like you said, I mean, you can't ask a freshman to go play in this game. So I get that. But also, like, you also have a responsibility to the other 21 guys on the team and with the guys on the field. And then, obviously the rest of the team that, if your quarterback is constantly putting them in positions to lose, that's going to be a problem. But yeah, I mean, I guess that's certainly that's the way Florida State's expecting. They're expecting to see Tyler Van Dyke. I don't know, man. Is there a wildcat option? Is there somebody? I just, what I'm saying, like, because Miami,
Yeah.
it would be one thing if Miami was not a decent team anywhere else, but they are a decent team. They've got good running backs. They've got a good defense. They've played well at different times, and it's like, you just can't get yourself beat at quarterback. But I guess let me ask you this: you've been around Tyler Van Dyke for the last 3 years. What do you think he can spin his way out of this at this point?
It's a great question, Ira. I really don't know. I've never seen him in this sort of a funk before, where you just look at him reading the field and he doesn't look comfortable, right? He doesn't look like what he's seeing on the defensive end is giving him any confidence. He's just it's kind of like a pitcher, right, who gets the yips. It's kind of the same thing right now where he's hesitating. And obviously, look, these last couple of opponents haven't been the first ones to rush 3 and drop 8 against them. He's seen these kind of defenses before, but for whatever reason, he just hasn't been able to sort of snap out of it. Like I said, since he took those big hits at North Carolina, one to the knee on a run out of bounds, and the other one while he was throwing a touchdown pass right in the ribs. He just looks like a different guy. So I hope for Miami's sake and for our sake that we get a decent football game on Saturday. So I'm hoping Tyler snaps out of it. But I think a lot of this, and I said this on my podcast this week, I think a lot of this has to go with the offensive coordinator as well. Shannon Dawson had things rolling through the first 4 games of the season, and it seems like his very simplistic air raid offense, which, by the way, doesn't really have a tight end involved whatsoever. When was the last time you would ever think that Miami's tight ends are so
Hey,
scarcely involved?
Florida State fans are happy to hear that, buddy, because
Yeah, but
they spent years whining about Mickey Andrews not covering the tight ends.
but that's the way it's been. And I think going into the last game, they had 9 catches combined. Cam McCormick is really a blocking tight end, a 7th year, 8th year guy out of Oregon who's had injuries throughout his career. He's kind of just a blocker. Riley Williams, the talented freshman, really not involved much at all in the offense. He's playing, he's just not getting any passes on his way. So to me, there's things that Shannon Dawson can do to make life easier on Tyler Van Dyke, and I don't see them making that adjustment. They didn't do it against NC State, other than play true freshman Mark Fletcher a whole lot at running back, and they gave him the ball and they let him pound it. So that's really the only wrinkle I've seen where they kind of went heavy with the big running back now that he's healthy, and just let him sort of pound away. So I'm very interested to see what the countermeasures are this week. I think Miami's receiver talent is okay. I don't think it's great, but if you can mix in the tight end, get Riley Williams to catch some balls, get Mark Fletcher, I don't know, run a halfback screen, do something different where Florida State hasn't really seen that on film yet, and maybe you catch them in a surprise.
A lot of people, I mean, the old saying is fatigue makes a coward of us all.
Mm-hmm.
Pain also can. I mean, how much of it is do you think Tyler doesn't feel good? Like, I mean, you mentioned those hits. I mean, how much do you think that's a concern? I mean, do you think that's affecting his decision making and his overall comfort level?
Yeah, I think overall, I think he's just not 100%, right? Like physically and mentally. I think both of those areas. And look, when your coach doesn't sort of back you up and say you're still the starter, right? It kind of, and I get it. As a head coach, you got to try to get your guy to wake up. But this is the first time in Tyler's career that any coach at Miami's basically said he's not the dude ever since he became the dude. So it's interesting. I'm interested to see how he responds, to see if he responds positively to it. But again, none of that psycho stuff is going to work unless he's running something different. And I think this Miami offense has to make adjustments this week. They got to get other people involved and show something different than they have.
Yeah, Florida State's defense, when you look at the matchups, earlier this year, man, I saw Colby Young. I mean, I saw him make some plays down the field, and obviously Restrepo's super productive and kind of the focus. But I feel like that they've got some weapons, but to your point, I mean, it's almost like there's some predictability about it. There's not a lot of imagination, maybe.
Yeah.
And Florida State's defense, they've been good. What they haven't done really until last week. Last week against Pittsburgh, they gave up one busted play. It kind of worked out for him. The kid ends up stripping the Pitt receivers. He's going into the end zone, so they end up not giving up points. But there's 1 or 2 busted plays in that game. For most of the season, they've done a good job of not having blown assignments, not giving up free passes, and kind of keeping things in front of them, rallying to the football. They do a pretty good job of not giving up a 50-yard run. They'll keep even if a running back gets a hole, maybe they'll keep it to 12 or 10, 15 yards. So from that standpoint, I don't feel like Florida State's defense is going to beat themselves. Has Miami I was wondering, has Miami had success against a defense that played well, and didn't give them anything?
Well, I mean,
I guess, when he was playing better, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, against Texas A&M earlier in the year, and Texas A&M, their strength pretty much all season has been what they've done on defense, right? You go back to that game to win when they were throwing the ball down the field. Tyler had 5 touchdown passes. There's a whole lot of man coverage, a whole lot of bringing pressure and beating, throwing the ball to guys in one-on-one situations, and Miami's receivers making plays. But again, I feel like whatever Shannon Dawson brought with him after game 4, it seems like everybody's figured it out. Georgia Tech figured it out. Tyler had 3 picks in that game. The following week against Clemson with Emory Williams in, it was a different game plan. They were basically After the North Carolina loss, they were basically running the ball with Emory. And then the last 2 weeks, I mean, even Virginia, it was very similar, just sort of drop back. Don't let their receivers, don't let, Xavier Restrepo, don't let Colby Young beat you down the field. Keep everything in front, and Tyler's going to make mistakes in with zone coverage. So
So
again,
is he forcing things, or are people jumping stuff,
I think there's times when he's forced things. The interception at NC State in the first half, just a bad read. If he throws the ball to the back pylon instead of, in where he thought maybe his receiver was cutting, that's probably a touchdown and not an interception. And then the other two, I think, were just, desperation, force, like, hey, we're trying to get things down the field. We're trying to make something happen. There's been guys underneath that have been open. He could check the ball down. The problem is his tight ends are just not reliable either. They've dropped balls for him. So it's been one of those, again, when Miami was 4-0 and we were all talking about, hey, how come the tight end is involved? Hey, how come the running backs aren't catching the ball of the backfield? Nobody cared because they were 4-0 and they were scoring points.
right?
But we were all, I mean, me and the other Carlos Ledo, who does the Wide Right podcast with me, we he's an ex quarterback at Miami High. He was an offensive coordinator for a little while in high school, coaching wise, so he knows the game. And he was telling me, he's like, this is going to come back to bite Miami in the ass. They're just throwing the ball too much to the wide receivers, and defenses are going to figure out, well, if all we got to do is cover Xavier Restrepo and Colby Young and Jacoby George. We don't need to worry about, what the running backs and tight ends do because they're just not involved at all. So it seems, again, I don't want to put it all on Shannon Dawson, but certainly I think, you can't just sit here and point the finger at Tyler Van Dyke and say, well, he's to blame. He's the guy throwing the ball. I think part of this is the way you approach a game, the way you game plan. What is it that you're practicing all week? Tyler did miss a week or two of practice because he was banged up and recovering. I know the Virginia week, I don't think he practiced at all. And then this past week, there was, he was back out there with a brace and the whole thing, but banged up. And when you're not getting all your reps and you're struggling, you're throwing interceptions, it's not a good recipe for you.
Man, I just think about like the way they've lost a couple of these games. I mean, they could be what? I mean, they could be.
Well, if you take away Georgia Tech, that was the most winnable game. You just take a knee, then they're 7-2. And even losing last week, they're probably still ranked at the end of the top 25. And this is a much different game, right? We're not talking about Miami as a team that's sort of falling apart. We're saying, well, they're still 7-2,
So
and maybe,
North Carolina, did you feel like North Carolina was a better team?
in the second half, they certainly were. I think, when you go back and you look at that first half, Miami had opportunities. They sacked Drake May in the end zone, forced the ball out, just couldn't come up with the fumble. If Ruben Bain happens to pounce on that ball instead of it skirting away from him, then maybe Miami wins that game. But it got away from them in the second half, and North Carolina, went to the hurry up. That was a problem for Miami's defense. They weren't, the way that North Carolina ran the ball in the second half, they just weren't prepared. It looked like they weren't well prepared for it, the way North Carolina went with it. So, was North Carolina necessarily better than Miami? I don't think so. I thought they were very even. Drake May was probably the difference in that game. He just did a better job in the second half than Tyler did. But at that point, Tyler had already been hit really, really hard in the ribs. He'd already taken a helmet to the knee, and that was sort of the beginning of his struggles in my mind. So they should probably be 7-2. NC State ultimately, you got to give them their due. They did what they had to do on defense to win that game. So, but yeah, I mean, they could very well be 8-1 or 7-2 right now, and probably
That's what's
should be.
Yeah, and that's what's crazy to me is if there's a feeling. I don't know how it is in Miami, but it
Mm-hmm.
feels like there's a feeling around this game, especially look at the point spread that like, okay, well, Florida State's clearly so much better than Miami in the quarterback position for sure. Jordan,
Yeah.
I think Jordan's got 2 picks all year, and
Oh
and
yeah. I
I mean
was
that's
looking
a
at the
huge
turn.
difference. Yeah.
I lined the teams up in a bunch of statistical categories here for us to talk about, but you go over to turnovers lost. Miami's has 19 for the season. They're 124th. FSU's only turned it over 5 times. They're tied for
Wow.
third in the
So
country.
that might explain some differences. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. They've been sloppy, and really it's been interception. I mean, Miami's fumbled the ball a couple of times as well, but it's the errant throws, it's the bad decisions.
Yeah, that's crazy. I mean,
Yeah.
that's
It's a huge number, right? Yeah, I got a bunch of them I could share with you here, but that's certainly one that sticks out like a sore thumb. One thing I want to ask you before we kind
yeah.
of start breaking the game down maybe a little more is what's the latest with Keon Coleman and Johnny Wilson, who both obviously didn't play against Pitt. I'd heard they'd come back to practice. I know you asked Mike Norvell today. I heard your voice in the video. Didn't seem to be wanting to give away any info there.
Yeah, I can't tell you anything, Manny. No, yeah, I mean, obviously, it's funny, man. Every coach is different, and Norvell is incredibly accessible,
Hmm.
and just lets us watch practice for the most part, a couple days a week, and is really good to deal with in a lot of ways. But man, injuries is the one thing he is so paranoid about. In
Yeah.
fact, there was anyway, there's been situations in the past where like media members, including us, have been suspended from watching practice because we put too much information out there. So
Yeah.
it's kind of a weird situation. But I mean, my personal theory was, and this isn't based on any inside information necessarily. I just felt like Keon Coleman, just watching the way he walked around, just the way he was carrying himself at the game, even. I feel like if they needed him to play against Pitt, I think he probably could have played against Pitt. Like if I feel like if the Miami game was last week, then maybe he would have played in the Miami game.
Yeah.
Um, so a week later, I mean, I have to think he's going to play. I mean, that kid
Okay.
is, he thinks he's expecting to be a first round pick, and this is a great opportunity to go up against some really good DBs, and it's a huge game for Florida State. So if
Yeah.
he can play, I think he's going to play. I can't say that I know he's going to be 100% or not, but I'd be surprised if he doesn't play. And then Johnny Wilson has practiced some this week. And Mike Norvell's talked a little bit more freely about him. He was hurt a couple weeks earlier. And so, my guess is that, if I was Miami, just like Florida State's expecting to see Tyler Van Dyke, if I'm Miami, I'm expecting to see both of those guys.
Yeah.
Now it may not happen, if you're coming back from an injury and you come back out of practice one day and it swells up, something swells up or something doesn't feel right, that could change. But the fact that, and the other thing was like, it didn't even feel like last week that, I don't know. It didn't, to me, it didn't even feel like they knew for sure they wouldn't even have those guys last week.
Right.
So I felt like that was kind of more like, Pitt's not going to score more than 14 points against us. So maybe like get these guys healthy. That was my perception.
Yeah.
But we'll obviously we'll know for sure on Saturday.
Yeah. And that's, for Miami on the flip side of it, just so you know, and your readers and subscribers know, Miami lost two of their starting cornerbacks against NC State to injuries in those games. Daryl Porter Jr., who I think has played pretty well for Miami all season long, and Jaden Davis, the transfer from Oklahoma, who's also, I think, put up some pretty good numbers, according to Pro Football Focus. Both of those guys left with injuries. And so you had Damari and Devontae Brown, the Brown brothers, whose father, of course, played at Miami. They came in, and obviously I thought Miami's defense still played well. They only gave up 20 points in that game. But I'm very interested to see what happens against Wilson and Coleman, who are obviously two of the best in the country, hands down. I mean, I watched those guys in person against LSU. I've watched Florida State games this year. For anybody who just looks at PFF scores, and it's kind of funny because I've heard Miami people say this. They're like, "Oh, these guys aren't even ranked that high in Pro Football Focus." I'm like, "Yeah, have you watched these dudes play, man? Like they're freaking good. Like Keon Coleman is a beast, and
Yeah.
it's gonna make a huge difference in this game to have
Well,
both."
and if you ever had any doubt, and I don't know if any Florida State fans have had any doubt, just watch them against Pitt, man. Like in the first quarter
Mhm.
or two quarters of that game, you're sitting there going, "Oh man, this is feeling like 2021 again." It's this offense. Give Mike Norvell a ton of credit. I think he's an excellent play caller. I think he's
Yeah,
got a very good offense. I think it's a modern offense, especially after we watched from Jimbo for all those years. But man, it's a whole lot different if you don't have 6'7" out here and 6'4" over here. And so yeah, I mean it's an enormous difference. And and if those two guys don't play, there's a lot of games, there's a lot of teams that they could lose to. If those two
yeah.
guys do play, there's not a lot of teams I think that can stop that offense.
Yeah, no, I agree with you wholeheartedly, and that was my biggest takeaway from watching FSU beat LSU in person in Orlando. That was my column. I wrote that Keon Coleman essentially makes them a different team, makes them a legitimate national title contender. just because of what he can do in terms of opening up the offense. And so for the Miami fans who are thinking maybe I should take Miami. Everybody's picking FSU to win this game. Maybe this is one of those years. My general feeling on this game is FSU will probably cover the spread the way Miami's playing offense these days. And I know you and I have been surprised over
Yeah.
the years. We've seen
Yeah.
some mismatches turn into tighter games, but I just feel like my gut tells me going into this week that with Tyler going through everything he's going through, he would have to have a remarkable performance for Miami to be tight in this game in the fourth quarter. I think Florida State probably wins this game easy. I don't know if you've done your predictions yet, but do you sort of feel the same way going into this?
Yeah, yeah, I do. I mean, I think I'm looking at I was looking at like 31-14
Hmm.
is kind of what I was thinking. And and again, I respect Miami's defense, man. I was going to ask you about Ruben Bain because I know Florida
Yeah,
State was trying to recruit that kid.
yeah,
I
he's
mean,
been a beast.
is he the best freshman defensive lineman around there in a long time?
Yeah, I would say he's the most complete. The thing about Ruben, and we've seen talented kids come through
Yeah,
both of these programs before, but Ira, just as well as I do from doing this for as long as we have, just because you have the gifts doesn't mean anything. Do you have the work ethic? Do you have the passion? Are you gonna take on double teams so your teammates can get to the quarterback? Ruben does all of those things. He's an unbelievable teammate. He doesn't care if he gets the credit for a sack. He just wants to dominate. He wants his team to dominate. And so that's what you saw happen last week against NC State. He started seeing double teams, but then that freed up other guys on Miami's defensive line to go make plays. So he is without question one of the best freshmen I've seen at Miami in a long time. He's a complete player. Some people were kind of knocking him a little bit because of his size as well. He's only 6'2", 6'3", 275. That's why he's not a five-star. I remember people saying that, and I'm like, dude, have you watched this guy dominate at the high school? I mean, Miami Central played an unbelievably tough schedule every single year, and that dude was putting up ridiculous sack numbers and tackles for loss numbers. And you just watch the guy play, and you're like, he is it. Like he is that guy. And so to me, yes. Now, is he going to do that against Florida State? I don't necessarily think so. This is a much better offensive line. He does face a very similar talented offensive line in practice every single day. So, but I think, Miami's going to need some other guys in this game to step up. Jaden Wayne, another freshman that they got, has played some. He's another guy that they're really, really high on. It's an edge rusher, another freshman that's really, really good. The guy I think who's been sort of a pleasant surprise to me for Miami has been Branson Dean, the kid that they got from Purdue, one of their transfers. He got nicked up for a little bit, missed some time, but whenever he goes in, Branson Dean seems to make a play. He's a 5th or 6th year guy. Obviously, Florida State has a bunch of older guys as well on the defensive line. You know the value in that, watching that position. So Miami's going to do a good job. The one thing I will say, and I wanted to kind of make this more of a big picture conversation at some point too, and we can go back and forth
yeah,
between the game and everything. But the one thing I will tell FSU fans about Miami, when we look back at this Miami season, whether it ends 6-6 or 7-5 or 8-4, however it ends, I think two things we're going to come away with. Number one, I think the defense, I think the hire of Lance Guidry was huge for Miami. I think he is the perfect fit for the type of player Miami recruits. I think you're going to be really impressed with the kind of game he calls. I don't ever see, whenever Miami has a bad quarter or they're struggling a little bit, the dude makes adjustments immediately and he gets the job done. I think his scheme is the perfect fit for this defense, which is why we've seen real improvement. The other thing I would say, we're going to come away with probably is feeling like, okay, in the arms race, when you need to find a quarterback, that's a position that Miami, even with Emory Williams, even with Jakari Brown and Tyler Van Dyke, like I think most of us are going to look at this saying Mario needs to get a quarterback either through the portal, either through recruiting, because Jordan Travis, you think about him and his path, right? And he wasn't the starter right away when he got to Florida State. It took him a little while to get there, but yet he's turned into everything Mike Norvell wants. And I think, for Miami, we're at the end of the season, we're going to say, man, maybe Tyler Van Dyke just isn't a fit for the kind of offense Mario wants to run. Maybe you need more of a mobile quarterback, a guy like Travis who can make plays with his legs and at least provide a real threat in that regard. And so
yeah.
I'm just looking, big picture. That's what I'm sort of coming away with. I want to ask you sort of the same question, but sort of a big picture question for FSU, which is, obviously this is tremendous job by Mike Norvell, and I want to get your thoughts on how how it all sort of came together for the Miami fans who are sitting here in dismay, thinking, "Man, we could be 11-11 with Mario after this game." But I wanted to ask you sort of a big picture, which is after this season, whether Florida State wins the national championship or not, they've certainly gone the transfer path and it's worked for them and it's been good for them. They've also recruited well with this next class. How confident are you that this is going to be sustainable in 2024? Or is there going to be a drop off in your mind? And if so, what are sort of the things that are going to need to be addressed for the Seminoles?
Yeah, man, I think that's the question in the back of a lot of Florida State fans' minds, but everybody's just trying to suppress it
Yeah.
until you get to that point. Because it's like, because early in the year, midway through the year, people started having that conversation. And anytime anybody brought it up to me, I'm like, man, just shut up. Just don't worry about that, because enjoy this. I mean,
Yes.
after you've been through what you've been through, worry about that tomorrow.
Yep.
It's like you take a trip to Disney World with the family and you're having a good time. It's like, hey, don't we have this bill come? Just let's worry about that.
Just
That'll
worry
be
about the
there when
bill
we
when
get.
it comes. Yeah. Yeah.
And so I mean, I just think that that's where Florida State is. But yeah, I mean, quarterback's such a big deal. And I know you were talking about quarterback before this question, but I think a lot of that goes together. Mike Norvell, one of the smartest things he did, and it was probably the biggest gamble he could have taken, was going into last year, going into the 2022 season. Everybody wanted him to go get a quarterback. Like, even though Jordan had shown some signs late in the 2021 season, got the win against Miami, showed some progress. Florida State fans, man, if you had taken a poll, I bet 80 to 90% wanted them to go get a quarterback out of the portal. They didn't feel like Jordan could stay healthy. They weren't sure he'd ever be the passer that they wanted him to be. And Mike Norvell knew that if he went out 1 year after going to get Mackenzie Milton, if he had gone out again and gotten another transfer quarterback, Jordan Travis will be somewhere else right now. Like, there's no way he would have stayed in Tallahassee, in my opinion. He's never said that. But I think Mike Norvell looked at it and said, you know what, if we can keep developing this guy, and if we can keep him healthy, which means probably running him a lot less, which they have run him a lot less these last two seasons. It's been more when out of need than just
Right.
doing it. Then we might have something special here. And it's hard to get a quarterback. It's hard to get a really good quarterback. And so, man, it paid off. I mean, it couldn't. I mean, we all know it paid off, but it was a gamble at the time. And so I think that was a big thing. And I think they did a great job at the end of last season of keeping guys who could have gone elsewhere. They lost, they probably lost 10 to 12 guys to the portal, but most of them were not key players. There was only one or two key players. But the key players, they got to stay through, NIL opportunities and things like that, where you were able to keep Jordan Travis, Jared Verse, Trey Benson, Johnny Wilson, a bunch of other guys down the line. I mean, you know how it is now, man. They have guys on this team that redshirted last year that had NIL offers to go to other schools. And they were able to keep all, that Battle's End, their big NIL group, was able to keep a lot of those guys here. That was a big thing. And then identifying some of those key portal guys was just, again, they nailed it. And, Keon Coleman's to me is the one, and you said he's the difference maker when you saw him against LSU. I didn't expect them to really go after him when he became available. I knew they probably needed a receiver, but I didn't feel like they needed a wide receiver one. I felt like you had that in Johnny Wilson. And I knew there was going to be a ton of other schools. I mean, Keon had 58 catches last year at Michigan State and a pretty bad offense. So you knew everybody was going to want him. And I just didn't think they would be able to get him. And they did. And I was completely wrong. I mean, because I didn't realize it would completely change the whole offense, but it really has. And so, they've made a lot of really smart moves in the portal. As you said, they have recruited pretty well in the background, even going into this year. I thought last year's class was a good class, even though it wasn't a highly rated class. But there is going to be a gap where they have to go back to the portal one more time. I think they're about 2 years away from really feeling good about not having to go out and get 10 guys in the portal. Maybe down the line, they're one of these teams that can only get 4 or 5 guys out of the portal. I think this is going to be another year where they probably have to go out and get 10 guys out of the portal. And where I think they might be, and we'll see. I mean, this is, the $1 million question again. It all goes back to quarterback. Is if if they're right about their backup quarterbacks, and I think they really like Brock Glenn, who's a freshman right now. They also have Tate Rodemaker and AJ Duffy that are older. You know, if they don't feel like one of those guys can get it done, now you have to go in the portal, and that's a gamble, man. These
Yeah.
portal quarterbacks, I
You
mean,
don't know what you're getting.
what's the
Yeah.
success rate on those? I mean,
Well, we ran a stat. The Athletic ran a stat today because I just finished recording a podcast a little while earlier, a recruiting podcast, Stars Matter. And one of our writers, Grace Rayner, was writing a story about just how I think 25 or 24 of the class of 2025 quarterbacks are already committed. You know, and how guys are the process is just speeding up more and more. But there was a stat in her story that I think still sort of tells the story, Ira, which is 57%. Max Olson put this stat in there. 57% of the starters at the FBS level this past season were transfers. So you can recruit guys, but ultimately nobody's waiting around anymore, dude.
right.
Like, and so I think, you know, you look at some of the other teams in college football, right, that are having success. I'm gonna go through the list. I have a list here of 11, the 11 best teams, you know, one loss or in the you know unbeaten.
Right.
I guess Georgia has their own guy. Michigan has their own guy, McCarthy. Ohio State has their own guy, McLeod. FSU has a transfer. Washington has a transfer, right? Um,
Yeah.
Oregon has a transfer. Texas technically has a transfer because Quinn Ewers was at Ohio State. Alabama has a homegrown guy. So that's 4-4. Penn State has a homegrown guy. Ole Miss, Jackson Dart, I think, is a transfer, is he not?
I think so. I believe so.
Yeah, and then Louisville has a transfer. So 5 or 6 rather of the 11 teams that either have one loss or are unbeaten and have a legitimate shot of making the playoffs have transfers at quarterback. So
But
I think the moral of the story is like it's up in the air now. It's not like
yeah.
the high percentage anymore is homegrown guys.
Yeah, yeah, and I think you can't, you know, I think Dabo is completely wrong to take his approach, but I
Hmm.
also think it's hard to go the other way. I mean, like, you know, Dion's finding out of Colorado. I mean, building,
Yeah.
you know, getting a whole team out of the portal isn't probably going to be as successful as you hope it's going to be, even no matter how it looked 3 or 4 weeks into the season. But
Yeah.
yeah, so I think they're going to go back into the portal. A real key is going to be there are some really good players on this team again that I think some people are assuming are going to go. And I just tell people, man, in the NIL era, man, you don't know for sure. Because if these guys are not going to be sure first
Yeah.
2 day picks, I don't know, man. Like if you can come up with some real money in the NIL, I don't know. Is that better than going and jumping into, you know, maybe being a 3rd day draft guy? I don't know if that's the better answer. So that's going to be a big part of it. They're going to get hit hard this year between the draft and seniors. But some of these guys who COVID seniors who finally
Yeah.
will have to leave, they're finally going to have to leave the house. They finally got to go
Yeah.
into their
Grow up.
lives. But but yeah, but I think if they play their cards right, and they've done so pretty well so far, I don't think they're going to fall off a cliff by any stretch.
No, no, I don't either. I would expect maybe they're not a championship team,
Right.
but they could very much be a playoff team or a team that reaches the ACC championship,
I was
something
going to
like that.
say in this ACC, I mean,
Yeah,
yeah, man. I mean, if they're right on their quarterbacks, man, if you got a pretty good quarterback, I think there's a good chance you'll be in the running.
yeah, and it's gonna be interesting what Mario does. I mean, there's been rumors out there they're gonna go out and try to bring Michael Pratt home. He's the Miami area guy. He's played at Tulane. That maybe he's the guy that they sort of identify in the portal and you know more of a more mobile quarterback who could throw and make plays with his legs. Maybe that's the better fit. I know from watching Oregon, everybody talks about Justin Herbert and how Mario sort of you know was able to just take him in and didn't necessarily do a lot with him, but you know he did win a Pac-12 championship. He did go to the Rose Bowl. You know
Yeah.
he had some success there. And I think the other, and I didn't mention this earlier, but I think another huge key for Miami has been the offensive line, just rebuilding that. I know it was a huge focus for Norvell, and you and I agree, Ira. Like if Miami and Florida State are ever going to win national championships again, it really does start up front on both sides of the ball because
Yeah.
that's what Alabama, Ohio State, like all of these teams have that. That's just, and I think Mario's really good at it, and Norvell, as we've come to learn, is really good at it too.
Yeah, and I think Alex Atkins, the offensive line
Yeah,
coach
he's
for
been
Florida State,
huge.
does a good job too, and he's a really good recruiter. That's kind of the big question now for Florida State when it comes to the offensive line is he's signed some really pretty highly regarded guys. Julian Armella from South Florida.
Yeah,
He's signed several pretty 4-star offensive linemen, borderline 5-star the last couple of years. And because they've been, I think this year you might have seen some of those guys. But
Mhm.
again, I think when Florida State went to the offseason, the same way they went and got Keon Coleman, I think they didn't have a huge need at offensive line, but they said this could be a special year. We only have Jordan Travis for one more season. Let's do whatever we can do. So they went out and got 3 more offensive line transfers to kind of bolster that group.
Yeah.
But when you talk about this game, you know, and I know we're talking big picture, but in this game, like it's a little bit of a concern for some Florida State fans because it's a solid offensive line, but man, Clemson wore them out.
Mhm.
You know, Clemson's defensive ends, man, I mean, they couldn't block, you know, one of those guys.
Xavier Thomas or
Xavier Thomas, man. He was,
Mhm.
I mean, it was Jeremiah Byers, their offensive tackle. He's probably still having nightmares because that kid just
Yeah.
blew him off the edge every time. So this isn't a great offensive line. It's a very experienced offensive line. They're competitive. They're not going to have huge busts where Jordan's running for his life, but going up against elite talent, and I think there's probably some elite talent on that Miami defensive line. That's an area that I think Florida State may have to scheme around a little bit to kind of help those guys out. But
Yeah.
I was going to ask you about big picture with Miami though, like
Yeah.
with Mario, you know, last year was, you know, obviously such a disappointment, and you and I talked about during the summer that he couldn't believe kind of the state of the program and kind of the
Yeah.
guys that were in that locker room, and man, he cleared house, right?
Yeah. 41,
40,
41 new
40
faces. Yeah.
yeah, so he made some changes there. And this year, you know, obviously you just see it looks different. Like they're
Mhm.
much more competitive together. Even after the Georgia Tech loss, they came back and they've been competitive. Is there a patience? You know, like I guess that's my thing when I look at
Yeah.
Florida and I look at Miami and I see some of the frustrations, you know, and that's how fan bases are everywhere. And Florida State fans were the same way in the first 2 years at Norvell. But like I just sat there when I looked at Norvell's situation after the second year. I'm like, guys, relax. I mean, his first year was a COVID year, and the program was a disaster.
Yeah.
And then you know the next year, you know, made some progress, but you know, I just don't understand like the idea of just rotating coaches every couple of years. At some point, you have to stick with one. Is Mario the guy that they'll stick with, even if it is 11-11, even if it
Yeah.
is, you know, are there is that support going to be there for him? Because I think at some point it can become so negative and toxic that it kind of almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy where you can't really get out of it.
Yeah. I think I'll say this. They signed him to a 10-year deal, I think in large part, not just to make him sign the deal, right? You give him that job security, but I think in large part too to show that hey, the university is making a real investment here. Like we're not. This isn't promoting Manny Diaz. This isn't promoting Randy Shannon. This isn't like
Larry
hey,
Coker. Yeah.
right? Like it's different. And I think the first sign we saw that was obviously Mark Richt, right? When Miami finally decided like, hey, we're gonna go out and get an established coach. And it worked out well for them. And they had good results. I mean, Mark's first season wasn't spectacular, but by the time they were in year 2, they were 10-0 and they had a chance at the playoffs. So I think the feeling here though, and Mario has made it pretty clear to the administration. I know I have when I've had conversations with them, is you guys have been asleep at the wheel for a long time at Miami. Like the whole private school, we don't have money thing, like that doesn't flow anymore in the world of NIL. Like you need to raise money and you need to invest it in the football program. You don't have an on-campus stadium, your facilities are average, you have to upgrade. So to me, like the investment in Mario isn't just an investment in Mario the person, it's an investment in football. And so he's going to be given the keys to this car, I think, at the very least, for another 3 or 4 years. Now, are they going to be patient in the sense of, hey, we're happy that you went from 5-7 to 6-6 or 7-5? Probably not. I think most people in the administration expect at least 8 wins. That's basically what I was told prior to the year. We can probably win 8 games with the roster that we have this year. And so but they will hold his feet to the fire in some capacity. I think at the end of this year they're going to say, hey, take the knee against Georgia Tech next time, like make some smarter decisions out there. Why aren't we recruiting better at the quarterback position, etc. But look, the same way you mentioned Battle's End, Miami's NIL is really healthy, and I know that was a huge question, right? Florida fans had fun when John Ruiz got in trouble and the whole financial thing. They're like, Miami's money's gonna run out. And I told you when I saw you
Yeah.
at the ACC Media Days, I said, listen, man, there's a lot of people with money at Miami who give money to this program. It's
That
basically
are
now
they're not all doing it in the public eye.
Exactly. They're not nearly, and the number I was given, I think I gave you this number as well, was 85 to 90% of the deals are now no longer related to John Ruiz and Life Wallet. So I think that number by the end of this year, by the end of the school year, will be over and done with, and it will be Kane's Connection and the other NIL groups that help fund this all. So look, Miami has the Moss family who gives a lot of money, Moss Tech, who builds a lot of things around here. Obviously, own the MLS team down here as well. So Miami isn't going to all of a sudden run out of money to be able to pay some of their best players to stay and not go pro, or pay some of their best players to stick around. I think there is a support system. Mario has a support system around him that no other coaches had at Miami, and I think they're going to give him at least enough time to say, hey, all right, you've had 3 or 4 years here to recruit, right? You've had 3 or 4 years here to build up the roster and turn it around. If he starts, if in 2025, you and I are having a conversation about Miami not taking a knee against Virginia and blowing it, or you know what I'm saying? Like if that's one of those, if we're still having that conversation, then I'd be worried if I'm Mario Cristobal. But I really think he's going to get the benefit of the doubt. And I think eventually you keep recruiting the way he recruits. Ira, I mean, it really still is about the Jerrys and the Joes,
100%. Yeah, and I heard was it Mike on Levitard's show saying that he said I think it was after the Georgia Tech game. He's like, look, man, Mario's probably going to have some of those moments on game day. Like, but we knew that going in.
Butch Davis, think about how many bad decisions Butch made over the years.
Hey, Coach Bowden. I mean, we've got to say it quietly, but I mean, some of those games that they lost that came down to a kick or shouldn't have,
right?
Because of time management or other decisions. So yeah, you take the good with the bad. But I guess if you were talking to somebody, and I know one of the many reasons I respect you is you call it like you see it. You don't take all day in punches. I know you've been critical of some of the things that have happened there even this season, but do you feel like, man, they're going to at least have talent? They're going to at least be within the next year or two.
Yeah, I listen. That's why I brought up Lance Guidry in the offensive line. Like to me, those are two staples. Those are two things that I think carry over for years now, for the next few years, and then you really start to see it elevate the rest of the program. To me, the big question I have is quarterback. What is he going to do there? And maybe is Shannon Dawson the right offensive coordinator? I don't know. I want to see what happens here over the next 3 games. What are his counter punches to teams rushing 3 and dropping 8? Is he going to have a counter punch? Is he going to get the tight ends involved? Like all those things I think matter. But I think as long as Mario has at least one of his coordinators, because you've seen it over the years, Ira, like Mickey Andrews with Bobby, right? Like they had different coordinators over the year on offense, but Andrews was there with him. You look at Dabo, right, with Brent Venables. Like you kind of have to have a co-partner. You look at Virginia Tech, right, with Bud Foster all those years. Like if you have at least one coordinator who you think is like just he's a fabric of the program, then you could shuffle guys at other coaching spots and just make it work. I think right now I look at the big steps and I say, yep, I like offensive line. Love what they're doing there. I love what they're doing on the defensive side. But Mario probably has one more important hire and at least probably a few quarterbacks to go out and get.
Right. Yeah. Going into this game though, like and I don't know if you want to talk more big picture. Or do you want to?
Well, just however you want to take it. Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I just think, again, this game, like one guy I was going to ask you about actually was Nigella Kelly. What happened? Is he banged up?
He got hurt. He's out for the season. He got lost in the North Carolina game. Yeah, they lost 2 of their best defensive ends. Akeem Mesidor got banged up in the 2nd or 3rd game of the year. Hasn't played since. He's out for the year as well. So, yeah, Miami's defensive line should actually be deeper and better than it is right now because Nigel and Akeem are 2 of their best guys. Unfortunately, they had those injuries, and that's kind of why you saw Ruben Bain emerge because they needed to play him. So, Leonard Taylor's had an okay year. I think a lot of Miami fans are sort of down on him and saying he doesn't make enough big plays. But the former 5-star guy, you're always going to have those high expectations for you. I think he's been solid. I don't know if he'll go pro after this year. I know some people have had him in mock drafts, etc. But again, they've recruited well at that defensive line position. I thought Mario did a good job in the portal this past year, better job than I thought he did the year before. Getting some pieces that mattered. The offensive line, Matt Lee and Javian Cohen, both of those guys actually still have eligibility, so they can technically come back. I don't know how many centers, go pro early. Matt Lee and those guys. Javian Cohen at left guard, like, yes, he came from Alabama and the whole nine, but maybe he gets a really good NIL deal again, and both of those guys come back, and so you've got all five starters back on the offensive line. That would be a really, really big coup for them.
and
So
could make them attractive for a quarterback, possibly.
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
I would say, I look at it. If they're able to get the receivers, some of the commits that they got Nye Carr, who's one of the top receivers in the country that they kind of got from Georgia. Chance Robinson, I know he's visiting Ohio State this weekend. He's a solid, St. Thomas Aquinas kid. They need more big play receivers, and hopefully Riley Williams takes the next step for them at tight end. Elijah Royal, unfortunately, has been banged up for them all season long, coming off the ACL. He came back, he got somebody rolled up on him at tight end, and so they've just been banged up there and not playing well. So those are the kind of things I look at and I say, well, you address it in the transfer portal, you address it in recruiting, and hopefully next year it's better, right?
Right.
But big picture wise, I think they're pretty good. They're in pretty good shape.
Yeah. Do you, in terms of, I guess, offensively, when you look at, and again, I know it's hard to know because we don't know what they're going to do at
Mhm.
quarterback. But when you look at, you've watched Florida State some, is there anything
Yeah.
you look at where, okay, Miami, if might want to attack them in this way, is there anything you think Miami needs to do or can do against Florida State's defense?
Well, one stat that blew me away, I didn't realize this until I looked at it when I started comparing the teams, is Florida State's only given up 4 touchdown passes all
Yeah.
season. And they've got 6 interceptions, which that's a pretty good ratio, dude. Like, you're playing some pretty good pass defense when that's the case. And I think in terms of like passing efficiency defense, I'm looking at the numbers here. I'm calling it up on my screen. They're only giving up 6.3 yards per pass. Opponent QBR, they're fourth. I mean, those are some pretty good numbers for that secondary. And really, if we're being honest, it's not like Jared Verse has exploded this year either, right? Like, he
Right.
hasn't put up any huge numbers. So it's not because the pass rush is playing great. So I think for me in this game, the only way Miami keeps this close is they don't turn the ball over, which is something that clearly I told you earlier, 19 turnovers on the year. They don't turn the ball over, and they keep producing turnovers. The defense has actually been pretty good at that. Miami's forced 15 turnovers this year, which is tied for 31st. FSU, I think, produced only 12. So
Mhm.
that is the number one thing. Don't turn it over, even if you're kicking field goals. If your defense is playing solid, holds FSU under 30 points, maybe you have a chance. Maybe you have a chance in the fourth quarter in this game if Tyler Van Dyke figures it out. But I would say the key is do not turn the ball over. That has completely devastated this team in every single one of their losses.
Yeah, and it's funny, like if you look at those numbers, and I agree with you. I mean, I think Florida State's pass defense has been good,
Mhm.
to very good. I think there are times again that I think Adam Fuller's more of a kind of let you throw things underneath sometimes. He's not
Mhm.
necessarily gonna they'll play a lot of man, but it's not like they'll keep safeties back a lot. They're not gonna let you beat them over the top too often. So I think there are some Florida State fans, again, especially the FSU fans who grew up with Mickey Andrews,
Yeah.
who want to, man, they just want to pound the quarterback, pick off passes, and
Right.
and just, and it's press man every play, and I don't, so there's always that standard that people are kind of holding them to. I'm sure like Miami fans think back to their defenses too, but no, I think they have been solid, and they haven't given up a lot of big plays. And they're, again, I think one thing that's been really good about them is they're very sure tackling.
Mhm.
And I mean, they do a good job of rallying to the ball and not giving up a ton of yards after contact.
Well, let me
Yeah,
ask you this. How much do they still run the counter over there? Because that gave Miami nightmares last year.
so not as much as last year. So what happened is apparently they did such a good job of that last year that I really think teams have focused on not letting them do that this year.
Okay.
So they'll still run it, but they haven't been as successful with it. And
Mhm.
some teams have blown it up.
Right.
Whether that's crashing from the backside, or there's just bringing an extra defender. There's just teams have really done a good job of kind of taking that away a little bit. So Florida State's actually gone. They've gone to a lot more than I've seen in the past. A little zone running,
Hmm.
just inside zone, even outside zone,
Yeah.
just to counter what other teams are doing against them. I also don't know if this offensive line is built the way that one was. I remember I was talking to one of the Florida State's offensive coaches about that game last year where they ran counter like 50 times and against Miami, and I asked him about during the offseason. He said at the end of that game, Dylan Gibbons, Florida State's left guard, he said his face mask was like smashed in because of
Oh
how many
wow.
collisions he had pulling. And he, after a while, some of those defensive linemen are tired of that, man. That's not,
Yeah.
especially defensive ends. Like that was one of the keys. He was explaining to me. He's like, defensive ends don't want to deal with that. They want to get up the field. They want to get after the quarterback. They don't want a guard slamming into them play after play after play. And I think that's what happened in that game. Is I think Miami's defensive line was kind of like, okay, this isn't really fun,
Yeah.
and we don't have a quarterback, and they just kind of start clearing those running lanes, and Trey Benson's is going off. So so it's not as huge a part of their offense this year. Part of it's by what teams are doing. Part of it's I don't think they have that same personnel.
Right.
They don't have that kind of smash mouth guy. I think Dylan Gibbons wasn't the best offensive lineman in the world, or he'd be in the NFL. He's not, but he
Hmm.
was willing to just put his body on the line on all those plays.
I was thinking of something that you messaged me about. I remember a couple weeks ago you messaged me because I was talking about Tyler Van Dyke,
Right.
and my co-host Carlos Leather was saying how Miami doesn't run any motion, and you explained to me. I wanted you to share that with the listeners, just about maybe some philosophy and why Miami doesn't run more motion pre-snap to see what the defense is doing.
Yeah, I don't know if it's true or not in that case. I just know
Hmm.
that talking to Coach Henshaw, who does some articles for us on our site, George Henshaw
Yeah.
was an assistant coach in the NFL for a long time. Was on Coach Bowden's staff at one point also, and he said that when he was with the Broncos, John Elway didn't like motion.
Yeah.
John Elway's super smart, obviously, but he didn't like. He felt like if the defense was set, he could figure out where to go with the ball, and he didn't like things moving. He didn't like the defense moving as he was getting ready to run a play, and he felt like running guys in motion would do that. So it was his preference. Now, part of being successful with that though was he also had John Elway's arm,
Yeah.
in accuracy.
Yeah.
So he didn't need you to kind of get the defense out of position. He didn't need you to get the defense confused. He just needed to see where they were, and he could fire it in there and get it done. Well, Van Dyke's got a strong arm.
Yeah.
So I wondered if maybe that was kind of a preference thing, where maybe he's a guy that kind of prefers that, but I don't know for sure.
Yeah, it's a great question. They really, outside of running one of the receivers in motion to get him close to the tight end, or on the opposite side of the tight end to sort of act like a blocking receiver, so to speak, you don't see them run a whole lot of motion at all. You don't see any orbit, sort of behind the quarterback stuff. It's very, like I said, it seems like the entire offense is predicated on throw it to the open receiver and have the tight end stay in and chip block, and very rarely involve the tight ends whatsoever. And
It's and I know Florida State fans can relate because
mhm,
and that was the thing with Jimbo is Jimbo's offense is all about execution,
mhm,
and so you never saw anybody running free. Like you
right,
never got easy throws.
mhm,
Like last week, Florida State gets a touchdown to the tight end Marquiston Douglas because he was lined up at left tackle. They had the
yeah,
other tackle lined up out wide, so they lined
created
Marquiston Douglas.
confusion. Yeah,
Yeah, it created the confusion, and now you
right,
got a wide open touchdown for 20 yards in a game
yeah,
where you're struggling offensively. And that was always the frustration with Jimbo. It's like, man, can you ever just give the quarterback an easy score or an easy play? And he never would. And I've even heard the Mannings, Peyton and Eli
yeah,
talking on the Manning cast about there's been some plays when they're watching games where, it's third and short or whatever it is, certain situations where they'll talk about help the quarterback out, get him an easy pass, like don't
yeah,
make everything be. And it felt like Jimbo, it was like the quarterback had to be so good all the time, and when you have
mhm,
Jameis, it worked,
yeah.
but the rest of the time it doesn't.
Yeah, I was listening to the Mannings this past week, the Chargers Jets game when they brought that thing up. They asked Trevor Lawrence, do you have like a set number of plays
Yes,
that are just that's where
and it
you
was
heard
a
it as well?
bunch, and it was a
Yeah,
bunch. No, I had
yeah,
heard him talking about it last year, but
yeah,
no, he said like 12 or 15 or something,
yeah.
right?
I think it was 14 plays or something. He said
Yeah,
I got 14 plays essentially that are just sort of help get the offense flowing,
right.
quick, releases, get the ball out. And again, like That's why Miami fans like they give Tyler Van Dyke a lot of crap, and deservedly so. He hasn't played well the last couple of weeks, but I brought this up on my Wide Right podcast, and again, I know where there's different eras. QBR ratings mean only so much, but if you go and you list every Miami starting quarterback, I mean, you go back to the 80s, he's got the second best QBR in Miami history behind Vinny Testaverde. Like, and look, I know it's a different era, but think
Right.
about this, Ira. Like, who is Tyler Van Dyke throwing to? Who did Vinny Testaverde throw to? Okay, like, come on, man. Like,
Yeah.
it's a different deal. And so I don't think Tyler's a bad quarterback. I thought at the beginning of the year, if he has a good year, maybe he's a day 3 guy, maybe somebody takes him and maybe he's a backup quarterback and eventually gets his shot. But this isn't, when Miami fans complain about him and say he's not a good quarterback, I just think he's in a rut right now. And so
Well, and I
Saturday,
think that's what,
yeah,
I think that's what, what Norvell has done a really good job with it. I was ripping Jimbo for not doing that. Norvell's done a good job with that. Like they'll find some easy throws and things like that to kind of get Jordan going and get the passing game going. But the thing about Van Dyke, though, you wonder, he feels like, like a lament from Florida State fans is a lot of Florida State fans to this day will say, you know what, if Mark Richt had stayed, what was Chris Ricks? What would Chris Ricks have been if Mark Richt had
yeah,
stayed at Florida State? Or if they had this modern football, like what could Chris Ricks have become? Or if he didn't have
right.
Jeff Bowden as his offensive coordinator. So, but the problem is that those things all happen. And I think when you look at Van Dyke's career, man, Lashley leaving and then the coordinator situation
Oh
last
yeah.
year was a disaster. Now you go to a different guy this year and
Then he's hurt for 2 of those years too.
right, it feels like he hasn't gotten a chance, but also that's not the fans' problem, like
No.
they also, I don't know, can you get out of that? Can you Jordan Jordan came through it. I mean, 2 years, he'll talk about all the time. He was getting booed 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So, you can come out of it, but it feels like the odds are probably against you. Like, I wonder, do you think Tyler might go somewhere else next year?
Yeah, I mean that's been a topic of conversation. Some people have thought maybe he'll go reunite with Lashley at SMU. I mean SMU's got 2 pretty good quarterbacks on
Right.
their roster. They're doing fine. Maybe he goes home to Connecticut. I don't know. I don't know where he goes. But that's why I'm saying, like, to me, we do the wrap up of Miami at the end of this year. We're going to be talking what happens at quarterback. We're talking about better offensive line and a better defense. And 2 out of 3 ain't bad in year 2. If he could have hit on all 3, then maybe Miami is 8-1 going into this game, and we have a very high national profile game that we're covering on Saturday. It just didn't work out that way.
So, yeah, I mean, from my standpoint, it's been interesting to hear you talk about it because a lot of us wonder what's going to happen with Billy Napier, what's going to happen with Mario.
Yeah.
To me, from what you're saying, Florida State fans need to get used to the idea of Mario Cristobal being there for a while until it just doesn't work. Maybe a few years down the road, right? I mean, I think there's not going to be more turnover there anytime soon.
I don't think so. I mean, maybe there's some turnover on the staff in terms of some coaches that come and go. I think Mario's sort of infamous for that anyway. Every year he kind of gets rid of a couple of assistants, and there's a bit of turnover in that regard. But I think right now they're going to pay Lance Guidry what he wants to keep him here, and I think like I said, I think Miami's got a good defensive coordinator. I think they got a guy that fits the landscape of the kind of players they can get. And I think the offensive line has gotten so much better, dude. Like it is a legitimate. He has got some dudes up there. Like Maui Go is no joke. He is one of the best. He's gonna be one of the best offensive linemen in the country soon. And look, they did a good job in the portal. They're gonna probably get some more offensive linemen just because once guys see that, they want to go play for coaches who produce that, right? So, I think those are 2 huge staples for them. I guess I'll flip it to you. I know I kind of made the joke before the season when you and I were hanging out at the ACC party way upstairs in Charlotte.
When you were trying to get me to dance like Brian Kelly.
Yeah, when I was trying to get you to do the Brian Kelly video, that would have been great, by the way. I still dream about that. I want to see you do the whole the eye thing. But I kind of joked with you guys up there. I said, hey, how long do you think Florida State's gonna be able to hang on to Norvell? And we're like, well, let's see him get past Clemson first. Let's see what, but now this is serious, and I'm not saying Florida State, who knows what happens with their future. Maybe they end up in the SEC one day. Maybe the Big Ten comes calling. I don't know what's going to happen. That's an entirely different conversation you and I can have with that. But, he's got to be a hot coach right now. And Florida State, if they stay in the ACC, they're going to be at a disadvantage, right? In terms of just what they can pay their assistants compared to Big Ten schools and SEC schools. What do you think happens with Norvell? I know he just got a raise. He's making a lot of money. Do you think he's going to have the kind of support system he needs to keep the kind of staff together, to keep an Alex Atkins, to keep Florida State on the path they're on right now?
I think they gave him like $1 more than Mario.
Yeah,
They
just to
were
make
they're
that
they're
point,
just
right?
they couldn't have the cheapest lowest paid head coach in Florida anymore. Yeah, man. I think there's 2 or 3 ways to look at it. Okay, number one, from a money standpoint, um, Florida State is, because they desperately want to get out of this conference
Yeah,
and they desperately want to be in either the SEC or the Big Ten, or if things get shaken up to where there's some new model,
yeah,
they want to be there.
right,
They're going to go broke getting there if they have to. So they're not gonna, like, the difference between now and, when maybe Jimbo wanted, his mansion, a football facility, and they were kind of like trying to make rational business decisions about money and being responsible with their money. That is gone, dude. Like, Florida State is going to do whatever they have to do to be good in football, so that whenever there's some new reckoning, or if there's a chance to get out of this conference, they're going to be there. They were afraid, frankly, that if they had a few more years of being 500, that they wouldn't get the call.
right.
So, whether it's a Big Ten, SEC, or something else, they just want to be positioned for that. So money's not going to be a big issue. I mean, I think
Okay.
if Norvell came to them next year with an offer from somewhere else to get 10 million a year, I think they'd match it. Like, they're not gonna. They are pot committed, man. Like, you can't raise them out of this pot. They're not going to
Yeah,
walk away. So from that standpoint, I wouldn't concern that. The other side of it, though, is, he's got his own visions, and what he
yeah,
wants to do, and what his opportunities are. So, my impression from him, from 2 things. One is, I think he does have a passion for Florida State and what Coach Bowden built here. And we can, roll our eyes at that, and some people are going to, just whatever, all coaches are mercenaries, and to
yeah,
some degree that's probably true. But I never thought Jimbo Fisher was tied to Florida State.
yeah,
Jimbo, if he could have left, he wanted to go to LSU the 2 years before he went to Texas A&M. So
right.
both of those years he would have left. Norvell, I think, is different. So as long as they're committed to him and giving him everything he wants, I think he appreciates the fact that Florida State has some unique qualities. There's some things going for Florida State, being in the Sunshine State, being in a city with FAMU. There's a lot of good reasons to want to be in the state capital. There's a lot of good reasons that this is a good job that I don't think some coaches appreciate. Jimbo, I don't think appreciate it, but I think Norvell does. Having said that, though, yeah, man, there's probably a couple of jobs in college football that any coach would be thrilled. I mean, LSU to me is always the job. I understood why Jimbo
Yeah,
wanted that job, because you own that state
yeah,
and you get, it's an incredible talent, and you get it all. Like, if there's a kid in that state that you want, you're getting that kid. They're not letting that kid leave. So there's a couple jobs out there like that, that I could see, down the road, maybe they would come after him. But to me, in the short term, he's not a guy, I don't think, he's a guy that's just about, like, the prestige, because he could have left Memphis a couple years before he left. Like, he had opportunities, I believe Arkansas and a couple other jobs came up, and they were much bigger in Memphis, but he wanted to wait and find the right big job. So I don't think that's a big issue. As far as assistant coaches go, I don't think they're going to lose them because of money. They're paying Alex Atkins really well. Adam Fuller is getting paid really well. They could lose guys who just get better opportunities.
right.
Atkins is
Move
a guy
up.
that FSU fans are very concerned about, Alex Atkins, because he feels like he could be a potential head coach.
Yeah,
And he also had NFL teams looking at him last year for an offensive line coach. So, he's upwardly mobile. And it may not even be about salary. It may just be, he needs to go do a new thing. But otherwise, man, I don't think money's going to be the issue. So I think they could be pretty locked in here, unless something happens and they can't keep committing to football.
right.
Then, yeah, man, Norvell's going to look out for himself.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting. And now that we go to the 12-team playoff, I mean, if you think about it, I mean, and the ACC does this different revenue sharing system where you're rewarded for postseason. I mean, FSU's in a really good position to still make a lot of money, even if it's not SEC or Big Ten money. It's more than everybody else in the ACC. And if the ACC is winnable every single year, an automatic, trip to the playoff, why would they not want that, right?
Dude, that's the thing that I've always be careful what you wish for. I mean, I get it, man.
Yeah,
The money is so big now. Like 10 years ago when Florida State fans were all ranting, they wanted to go to the Big 12. They want to get out of the ACC. The Big 12's paying more, whatever. I just, or if the dream was to get in the SEC, it's like, yeah, man, like let's see how much Oklahoma and Texas like that. I mean,
yeah,
you can't. I mean, let's just be honest. I mean, those programs put a lot more money and resources and have better talent bases than most of the schools in the ACC. It is what it is.
yeah,
And when you've got to be in that week after week after week, but you go to a 12-team playoff, though, on the flip side, now maybe you can get in with 2 losses. So it's not the end of the world if you lose a couple of games. So I see the merits of both sides. The problem, though, is, again, man, if you get to where, those schools are getting $30 or $40 million a year more, I just think Florida State is completely desperate to get out. Even if they don't win 11 games a year in the SEC, they need it financially, they feel like.
yeah. I understand. Money talks. I will say though, just from a competitive standpoint, it's funny. I did that, piece on Miami and Florida State potentially going to the SEC back in, before they left for the ACC, before FSU first left.
Mhm.
And I remember just talking to a lot of people who were like saying essentially like, could Florida State and Miami even really deal with that week in, week out of playing in the SEC? Could they physically survive? And I know Miami, Florida State fans don't want to hear this, but I think it's fair to question that maybe Miami and Florida State don't win national titles if they're not in the conferences that they ultimately chose to go to. Like, does Miami do what it does in the Big East without the Big East? Does Florida State,
Yeah.
you know?
I feel like Florida State could have probably done it in the 90s. I feel like Miami could have
Right.
done it back in the day, maybe. But
Yeah.
no, man, it's there's no question, dude. I mean, the thing is, and then you get the other side of it, which is so much as perception, and we're
Hmm.
getting it right now. Like we're
Yeah.
getting it right now. Florida State's undefeated, and people are already starting to kind of throw things out there. Well, if Alabama beats Georgia,
Yeah.
and they only have 1 loss, and it would be and now if they beat Georgia, is that so? That it feeds itself, the SEC and the narrative, and when you're the schools that aren't in that, you feel desperate to kind of be in it because you
Yeah.
feel like you're screwed if you're not.
Yeah, I think these first couple of years of the 12-team playoff are going to be really interesting. And it's quite obvious to me that the conference that really doesn't deserve to be in the conversation but has the most money is the Big Ten.
Yeah.
But the reality is, you and I know football. Like, how many of those Big Ten teams are really worth a shit?
Yeah.
I right, like,
Never.
I
And
mean,
that's why I'm not real fired up if that's where Florida State ends up going, because
yeah,
yeah, man, I'm all about, going to these SEC cities. I'm not
hmm
real fired up about going to Bloomington, Indiana, or bringing Purdue into Tallahassee.
yeah.
Or, I mean, yeah, the money will be great, but that's not going to be any better than the ACC.
No, it really
Uh,
isn't. I mean,
and
outside of Ohio State and
Penn State,
and Penn,
Michigan.
and Penn State, Michigan. I mean, I know they've added Oregon and USC and whatnot, but I just don't see the Big Ten expanding anymore. I think they've kind of like, when do you get too big, right? Like, when is it too big? I think the SEC is probably the one that if they wanted to, and I don't, who knows if they even really want to. All right, at this point, 16 teams. You got Oklahoma and Texas. Do you need Florida State? Do you need a North Carolina? Do you need a Miami? Probably not, right? Like, you'll be just fine without them. And you're probably putting them at a disadvantage by not inviting them to the party. So
Right, right. And that's where I think that if you're a Florida State fan or Clemson fan, you're hoping the Big Ten is interested in expanding, because then that might
yeah,
put pressure on the SEC to do it.
right, right. I
Because
think
otherwise, yeah,
I,
why would they?
my prediction is the Big Ten will get there when none of their teams win any national titles, even with the 12-team playoff. I think once they realize we're going to need a team from down south to join the conference to help elevate us to a championship level, I think that's when they'll make that kind of a decision. Because I just don't think USC, with the way Lincoln Riley runs things, I mean, maybe Dan Lanning with Oregon, maybe they're the team that turns the corner. But you just look at that Big Ten, it's like, I don't know. Michigan doesn't do it for me. Ohio State, they're like the one team that really
Right.
has won. So, yeah, it's an interesting conversation to have. All right, I've had fun, man. We've talked for a long time. Is there
Yeah,
anything
man.
else? Any other topic we didn't cover?
Talk about recipes. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know, dude. I look forward to seeing you on Saturday.
Yeah.
And 3:30 kickoff ABC. I'll be driving over with Susan Miller Degnan from Jacksonville. I'm giving her a ride over
So,
to town.
you're driving over with Susan from
Yeah,
Jacksonville?
yeah,
Oh,
from
is she flying
Jacksonville.
up there?
She's flying in, and then I'm driving from my parents' house. I'm picking her up on the way.
All
So
right, man. Watch those speed traps on the way on I-10. So I'm saying 33 to or 31 to 14.
$31.14.
Did you make a pick yet?
I think something similar. I'll probably go with like I think Miami's defense will play well. The offense might give up a touchdown. So maybe it's 27-16, something like that, 27-14, something around there. Very similar to your score. I just don't think offensively, I don't see Tyler getting out of it. I think they'll do some things to make them look better, but I don't know that it'll be enough. So,
Well, thanks, man. This is probably the more cordial Florida State Miami conversations people
right.
can find on the internet. So
It
I
was fun,
appreciate it, man.
Ira. Look
Thanks,
forward
man.
to seeing you, man.
All right, brother.